The sovereignty of Yahweh is a foundational theological concept that asserts that his supreme authority and control over all things. It means that Yahweh, as the creator and sustainer of the universe, has the ultimate power and right to govern, direct all aspects of creation. Yahweh's sovereignty encompasses his control over nature, human affairs, and the course of history. It affirms that nothing happens outside of his knowledge, will, or permission. This understanding of Yahweh's sovereignty brings comfort as it assures us that he is in control, even in times of uncertainty or chaos. It also highlights our dependence on Yahweh and calls us to trust in his wisdom and goodness. Recognizing Yahweh's sovereignty and sense of humility as we acknowledge that he is the one who holds all things together and works out his purposes according to his perfect plan. I'm Dr. Ray, and welcome to this week's Hosea International Speaks. Last week, I placed before you the statement, what if Jacob was meant to be born before Esau? In the story of Esau and Jacob, who was the younger of the twins, ultimately received the birthright and the blessing. This raises the question of whether Jacob was meant to be born first to fulfill Yahweh's plan and purposes. However, it is important to note that the narrative does not explicitly state that Jacob was meant to be born first. Instead, it highlights Yahweh's sovereign choice and the actions of the characters involved. Notice what I said, the actions of the characters. The events surrounding the birthright and the blessing reveal a complex interplay of human decisions. Notice that human decisions and God's providences. Esau, as the firstborn, held the natural, I want you to understand that and underline it, the natural right to the birthright, which included inheritance, privileges, and a position of prominence within the family. However, Jacob, with the guidance and the encouragement of his mother Rebekah, deceived their father Isaac to obtain the blessing that was traditionally given to the firstborn. Note now, Esau was then no longer entitled to the blessing that went along with the birthright because he sold it for a bowl of stew. Now, while Jacob's action can be seen as deceitful, it is important to understand that Yahweh's sovereignty was at work throughout the narrative. The divine choice and plan were not dependent on the cultural norms or birth order, but on Yahweh's purposes and foreknowledge. Yahweh had already indicated, notice this, his preference for Jacob over Esau before their birth. We're going to see that in Genesis chapter 25 and verse 23. And he worked through the circumstances to fulfill his promises. Now, let's read that portion of scripture we find in Genesis chapter 25, verse 23. Now, Isaac pleaded with Yahweh for his wife because she was barren, and Yahweh granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled. We're going to look at that word in just a few minutes. Struggled together within her, and she said, if all is well, why am I like this? So she went to inquire of Yahweh, and Yahweh said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. One shall be stronger than the other. Notice the phrase, and the older shall serve the younger. Let me paint the picture here for you. are based on the word struggle. The picture is one who would hunt and chase while the other lay in ambush in order to be the head. You look up that Hebrew word for struggle. In this story of Jacob and Esau, Yahweh highlights his ability to work through flawed individuals and imperfect situations to accomplish his plans. It underscores the importance of Yahweh's sovereignty in shaping events and fulfilling his purposes, even in the midst of human choices and actions. It means that no matter how things look to you in your eyesight, if it seems bad, doesn't mean it will end up bad. But if it looks like it's good, doesn't mean that it will always end up good. It's a matter of whether you will trust Yahweh or not. Now, the significance of Jacob receiving the birthright and the blessing goes beyond mere birth order. It demonstrates Yahweh's ability to choose and use individuals according to his purposes, regardless of societal expectations. It also serves as a reminder that Yahweh's blessings and promises are not limited by human conventions, but are ultimately determined by his will. While the story of Esau and Jacob does not explicitly state that Jacob was meant to be born first, it highlights Yahweh's sovereignty in choosing Jacob and working through the circumstances to fulfill his purposes and plans. The narrative emphasizes that Yahweh's plan and blessings are not restricted by human norms or birth order, but are ultimately determined by his will. It is our moral and legal obligations to find Yahweh's plan and then plug ourselves right into it. Yahweh's plans, Yahweh's purposes, Yahweh's will goes along this line. We might be down here, up there at one time, down, back down, all the way around here. But if we're out of God's will, we're not going to be able to do what God or Yahweh desires. We must plug into Yahweh's will so that we can fulfill his purposes, his plans, and our works in him. What about the portion of scripture now found in Malachi chapter 1, verse 2 and 3, in which it says, Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. Now, Malachi 1:3 says, and Esau have I hated. This verse is a part of a prophetic message delivered by the prophet Malachi to the people of Israel. Let's look at this phrase, and I hated Esau, or Esau have I hated. This verse begins with a strong statement that Yahweh hated Esau. The language of this hatred is not to be understood as a personal animosity, but rather as a contrast or divine disfavor. It signifies that Yahweh chose Jacob over Esau. Now, Jacob later on would be considered Israel. Esau would be Edom in terms of the covenantal blessings and the special relationship he established with the nation of Israel. Now, I'll just throw this in there. Could Yahweh have chosen Esau if he had not given away his birthright or if he had not given away the blessing? Esau, remember, sold the covenant blessing, which is placed upon the firstborn of the son of the household. He despised that birthright placed upon him, and he literally gave it away for that bowl of stew. Yahweh was nowhere in his life, for if he was, Esau would have never sold the birthright. He would have trusted Yahweh to supply him whatever he needed. Yet Yahweh had a brother who took every opportunity, every advantage of the demise he was in to deceive him out of the very important position in the eyes of Yahweh. Jacob was the firstborn. The phrase, now let's look at the second half of Malachi chapter, or the second part of that. Jacob have I loved, which we find in Malachi chapter 1, verse 2, expresses Yahweh's declaration of his love for Jacob, which represents the nation of Israel. To understand the significance of this phrase, it is essential to consider its historical and theological context. In the Old Testament, Jacob, the son of Isaac and the grandson of Abraham, played a crucial role in the lineage of Yahweh's chosen people. God made a covenant with Abraham, promising to bless his descendants and make them into a great nation. This covenant was passed down to Jacob. Let me just say this. If Esau had not, it could have been passed down to him. Remember, Esau was also Abraham's grandson, Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel. Through Israel, or Jacob, Yahweh intended to fulfill his promises and bring blessings to the world. The phrase, Jacob have I loved, reflects Yahweh's special relationship and affection for the nation of Israel, which descended from Jacob. It highlights Yahweh's covenant love and his choice to set apart the Israelites as his chosen people. Yet God's love for Israel was not based on their righteousness or merit, but on his sovereign grace and purposes. Yahweh's love for Jacob, and by extension the nation of Israel, was evident in various ways throughout their history. He protected them, provided for them, delivered them from their enemies, and gave them his law and guidance. Yahweh's love for Israel was rooted in his faithfulness to his covenant promise, and his desires to bless them and use them as a nation, or as a light to the nation. The phrase, in conclusion, Jacob have I loved, also carries a prophetic significance. It foreshadows the future of Yahweh's redemptive plan through the Messiah, Jesus Christ, who would come from the lineage of Jacob. Through Jesus, Yahweh's love would extend to all people, offering salvation and reconciliation to anyone who believes in him. This phrase in Malachi is spoken in response to the Israelites' questioning of Yahweh's love, chesed, Yahweh's covenant love. The people were doubting Yahweh's faithfulness and care, and Yahweh reassures them of his love and reminds them of their special status as his chosen people. This phrase serves as a reminder of Yahweh's unconditional love, his faithfulness to his promises, and his sovereign choice in selecting a people for his purposes. It conveys the depth of Yahweh's affection and his commitment to bless and care for his chosen one. For Christians today, this phrase also points to the broader understanding of Yahweh's love for all believers, as we are grafted into the spiritual inheritance of Israel through faith in Jesus Christ. Well, if you've enjoyed this week, go ahead and hit the like button right about there. And then if you wish to be notified the next time we go live, go ahead and subscribe. If you still wish to give to the ministry, go ahead and use the QR code right here somewhere, and just go ahead and scan it. Or you can go to Venmo at hoseaintspeaks. And if you have any questions, go ahead and email me at hoseaintspeaks@gmail.com. I'm Dr. Ray, and I'll see you next week on Hosea International Speaks.